Here's something that doesn't add up. Most retirees are more afraid of running out of money than they are of almost anything else life can throw at them. And yet, a huge share of people who retire with a reasonable nest egg end up spending far less than their plan actually allows. Some finish retirement having barely touched what they built. So the real risk isn't always the one people prepare for. The real reason has almost nothing to do with math, and everything to do with a habit most retirees don't even know they have. Let's call her Diane. She's 68, retired 2 years ago after 3 decades in healthcare administration. Her husband, Paul, retired around the same time. Between Social Security and Paul's modest pension, about $4,200 lands in their checking account every month. They also have a retirement account worth a little over $600,000. Enough, according to their own plan, to support the life they wanted. For 8 months, they talked about a trip to Portugal. Paul had always wanted to see it. They could afford it without blinking. But every time Diane opened the account to transfer the money, she hesitated. She'd close the laptop and tell herself she'd do it next week. Next week became next month. The trip almost didn't happen. Not because of the balance, but because of something harder to name. For 30 or 40 years, people are trained to do one thing extremely well: protect the number. Work, save, invest, avoid touching the principal, watch it grow. That instinct gets reinforced every single year of a career. Then, on one specific date, everything is supposed to flip. The same account that was off limits for 4 decades is suddenly supposed to become the thing that funds daily life. Almost no one teaches you how to make that transition. There's no course on how to stop protecting and start spending. So a lot of retirees are technically retired, but emotionally, they're still in accumulation mode. The calendar changed, the behavior didn't. Here's where the real problem begins. Not all dollars feel the same, even when they're worth exactly the same amount. When Social Security or a pension check lands, most retirees spend it without a second thought. It arrives, it gets used. Groceries, bills, maybe dinner out. Nobody agonizes over a paycheck. But ask that same person to transfer money out of an investment account for the exact same purpose, and something changes. Now there's hesitation. Now there's a mental negotiation. Research from retirement income specialists David Blanchett and Michael Fink put a number on this gap. Retirees tend to spend around 80% of the income that arrives automatically, but only about half of what's sitting in their investment accounts. Same purchasing power, same grocery store, same life. But one category feels earned and safe to use, and the other feels like something to defend. There's a well-documented idea in behavioral research, often traced back to psychologist Daniel Kahneman. Losses tend to feel roughly twice as painful as an equivalent gain feels good. That single fact explains a lot of retirement behavior. Picture logging into an account and seeing a big number, say $700,000. Now, withdraw $20,000 for the year. That number drops. Even though it's a planned, sustainable withdrawal, the brain doesn't file it as spending. It files it as loss. Now add a market downturn in the same year. A retiree who's already anxious about pulling money out watches the balance fall for 2 reasons at once: the withdrawal and the market. That combination can feel like a double loss, even when the underlying plan is completely fine. So people pull back, not because the math changed, but because the feeling did. But fear isn't the only force at work. Spending patterns genuinely shift as retirement goes on. Many retirees travel less in their late 70s and 80s than they did right after retiring. Homes get simplified, cars get replaced less often. The costs tied to working, commuting, professional wardrobes, business travel disappear entirely. and never come back. This is one reason real spending in retirement often declines gradually over time, rather than staying flat. That doesn't mean every cost goes down. Healthcare and long-term care can move in the opposite direction, and that reality deserves its own conversation. But the idea that retirement spending stays the same year after year, the assumption a lot of financial plans are built on, usually isn't how it actually plays out. The same dollar can feel completely different depending on where it comes from. And nowhere is that clearer than when you compare two retirees side by side. Picture two people, similar age, similar account balances. Let's say both have around $300,000 saved. One of them has a modest pension layered on top of Social Security, covering most of their essential monthly expenses. The other relies on Social Security alone, which covers a much smaller share of what they actually need to spend each month. Even with identical account balances, these two people tend to behave in completely different and completely rational ways. The one with more guaranteed income covering their basics tends to draw more comfortably from their savings because the essentials are already handled. The one without that cushion holds back because their account isn't just extra. It's the entire safety net for a leaking roof, a car repair, or a health cost down the road. This is what's often called an income floor. How much of your essential monthly spending is already covered by money that shows up no matter what the market does? It's not a formula that applies the same way to everyone, but it's often the single biggest factor separating retirees who spend with confidence from retirees who spend with fear, even when their account balances look nearly identical. And this is the point many retirement plans miss. None of this means everyone should simply spend more. That would be irresponsible advice, and it isn't the message here. Caution is the right response when essential expenses aren't fully covered by reliable income. It's the right response when the nest egg is small relative to expected costs, when debt is high, when there are real health risks on the horizon, when someone is financially supporting a family member, or when a plan depends on withdrawal rates that are genuinely aggressive. If someone isn't sure whether their savings are even sufficient, fear isn't the enemy. It may be useful information. So the order matters. First, figure out whether the plan is actually sustainable. Only after that becomes clear does it make sense to ask the next question. Is the fear bigger than the real risk? Here's the answer the title promised. Many retirees with a reasonable financial foundation will likely never run out of money. Not primarily because of clever investment strategy, but because of a set of very human habits. They withdraw less than their plan actually allows. They spend decades being trained to protect a balance, and that training doesn't switch off the day they retire. They treat savings as something to guard rather than something to use. Their spending naturally eases in certain categories as the years go on, and whatever essential expenses are covered by steady income arrive with automatic permission to be spent, while everything sitting in an investment account has to fight through hesitation first. Put simply, the portfolio often ends up functioning less like a resource for living and more like a symbol of safety. That's the real reason the balance so often survives longer than expected. And it's also the reason so many people live smaller lives than their savings would actually allow. Here's a simple exercise worth doing on paper, not just in your head. Call it the retirement permission check. Write down how much arrives every month from predictable sources: Social Security, a pension, any other steady payment. Next to it, write your essential monthly expenses. Then ask, based on a sustainable plan, how much could reasonably come from savings each month on top of that? After that, get specific. What have you been putting off? A trip, a renovation, help for a family member? Purely out of unease, even though you could actually afford it. What purchases would genuinely improve your daily life, not just your bank statement. What exact risk are you trying to protect against by holding back? And honestly, do you have an actual plan behind that caution, or mostly a vague, unexamined sense that something bad might happen? This isn't about a universal withdrawal percentage, and it's not a substitute for a real financial plan. If the numbers aren't clear, or if there's real uncertainty about whether savings are sufficient, that's exactly the kind of decision worth working through with a qualified financial professional. Diane and Paul didn't decide to spend recklessly. They sat down and actually looked at the numbers, what came in every month, what their fixed costs were, and how much room the plan genuinely had. Then they did something small but specific. They set up an automatic monthly transfer from their investment account into a separate account they labeled, simply, Portugal. The amount was modest. It showed up on its own, the same day every month, without either of them having to make a decision about it. 6 months later, they were in Lisbon. Diane said the strange part wasn't the trip itself. It was how normal spending the money felt once it arrived like a paycheck instead of a withdrawal. The balance in their main account barely moved. Their life did. Retirement was never meant to be about protecting a number forever. It was meant to fund an actual life. The version of it that's safe, but also lived. Because there are two ways to run out. One is running out of money. The other is spending 20 or 30 years acting as if the money already ran out, when it never did. If this made you realize that you need more clarity before giving yourself permission to spend, write "I need a plan I can trust" below. It helps to actually see it written down. If you found this useful, consider subscribing. This channel is about the invisible habits that quietly shape how people handle money, the psychology behind saving, spending, and the quiet decisions that add up to a whole financial life, including retirement. No promises of getting rich here, just an honest look at the patterns that run underneath the numbers.